What's up, guys? This is BunnyMuffins. Today we have patch 9.24 patch notes, and I'm going to be going over everything. We have new champions, a new trait, new UI, and I think we have some nice balance changes, but let's just dig right into it. So I'm looking around here. Our new class is called Soulbound, and this is a two-person synergy. It allows the first Soulbound champion that dies to continue fighting as someone untargetable until the other Soulbound users die. This sounds very, very strong, especially with items, so we'll just keep an eye out for that. But I think this is very strong. So the first champion, we have Senna, who is Shadow and Soulbound. This means that Shadow got buffed since they have one more option now, and her ability shoots a beam that damages enemies and buffs allies with an on-hit ability. On paper, this seems pretty strong. I think that she'll be played, and that ability looks really good because it does damage and buffs allies. That's really good synergy. Next up, we have Lucian at 4 costs. That's interesting. So different from the last one, and he is light and soulbound, and his ability, the culling, will shoot a lot of bullets in a direction over 4 seconds. And it applies on hit abilities. So I can imagine this is really, really strong with Giant Slayer, because he does 10 plus a lot of other attacks and they all apply on hit, so that's probably the best item on him if I had to take a guess. But he seems pretty good too, but definitely you want Giant Slayer for that. Lastly, we have Amumu. He's a tier 5 Inferno and Warden. His ultimate stuns in a 2, 3, and 4 hex radius depending on his level, and for 2 seconds. That sounds really strong. It's like a Cho'Gath ult from last patch, and since he's Inferno, he'll be applying that Inferno proc to everyone, so I could see his ability getting pretty out of hand fast. Next, we have the interface updates, and we got an updated level bar. So let's see. We can now see how much gold we have for the next level, which is very useful because I've miscounted many times before. I don't know about you guys. Even players at all levels make that mistake. We see champion drop percentages, which is pretty useful, and lastly, we see that the XP and reroll button locations have changed since, yeah, that's kind of troll, but since I only advocate using hotkeys, and that means that this change doesn't really affect me at all, and hopefully if you guys use hotkeys before, this shouldn't affect you at all either. So rerolling, you can press D instead to reroll, or press F to level up. Next up, we're redoing the home and carousel buttons. So this also doesn't really affect players who use hotkeys, because you could just press spacebar to return to carousel or return to your home screen. But they added a button for that as well. Hopefully all these changes do improve usability, and I'm pretty glad that they did this because it makes the game a lot more accessible to new players. Next, we roll into the traits. Okay, wow, huge buff to Berserkers. 25 attack damage is a lot. Most champions typically have around 100, so that is quite a healthy amount, 25% for all Berserkers. Especially with the way their trait ability works, that's really useful for them. Cloud got a buff as well. I don't really understand this one. I always thought Cloud was pretty strong because they can abuse the dodge mechanic on the Cloud map with Iceborne Gauntlet, and I just don't really think they needed that, but shouldn't really change too much. They weren't oppressive, but it's just annoying to deal with. Electric got buffed, so I'm not sure how I feel about this since Zed is already pretty strong, so that doesn't really make sense to me, but I'm guessing maybe the other champions are not as mainstream within Electric, so that's how they justified that, and maybe they're nerfing Zed later this patch, or maybe next patch. Next up is Inferno. Okay, interesting changes. So it now procs on critical strikes and can affect multiple hexes, but the damage is reduced. Overall, this is obviously a buff since you can hit it on critical strikes now. And I expect Inferno to be pretty strong. It already is pretty decently good because they have Brand and Annie, which are 2 of the stronger champions in the game, and this buff makes them even better. So Light got a minor buff. Shouldn't really change too much. 5% isn't that much of a increase. Lights used to be strong when you hyper-rolled them, but then as the patch went on, people learned how to play the patch better and found more interesting combinations of classes and traits. So that's why Light fell out of favor, but they're likely still too weak with these changes. Next up, we have Ocean. Thank God Ocean's got nerfed, even though it's very minor. But it's still something, but doesn't really change much. Ocean Mage is still very strong. Then we have Rangers. Rangers got a pretty good buff. Oh wow, 6 Rangers is interesting. I don't even know if there are 6 Rangers. I'll have to double check that later. But all in all, I'm all for Ranger buffs. They're one of my favorite classes just because they're really cool to watch and they could get some epic wins um, with their trait bonus. They should be pretty decent moving forward since they weren't too weak before this buff. So next we have Shadow. Okay, yeah, so they're thinking the same thing. Yeah, Shadow would be a little too strong with the Senna edition, so I'm glad that they reduced the trait or changed the trait to 3 to 6. Though I think 6 is a little too much because it's hard to get 6 of anything, and I think there are only 6 shadows minus Lux. So it'll be impossible to get the reset when any shadow champion gets a takedown. It's more mainly just the buffs themselves. So maybe Veigar's still pretty decent with this, or the high-end shadow users, but the random ones not so much. But I guess, yeah, I think it'll only be good with Lux at 6, but maybe 3 is usable since 3 is pretty easy to hit. Next up we have Summoners. Summoners, yeah, I agree with this change. So they nerfed the 3 summoner bonus, but buffed the 6 summoner bonus, and this makes complete sense. Every comp was using 3 summoners. I haven't even seen 6 summoners except for maybe some cheesy games, so I like this change overall. Next up, we have champions. Okay, so this is all 3 of these are very good changes. Ivern, Maokai, and Renekton are all being nerfed. These were all part of the hyper roll compositions, and it was a little too easy to get them for the power they provided, so I'm completely for this change. Tier 2, we have Nico, range buff, and Yasuo damage buff. I thought these 2 were in okay places, but I guess a little more power to them doesn't really change too much about them. At tier 3, okay, Aatrox got a huge buff. 85 mana to 70 mana. So mana means so much at those levels. Remember when Lissandra got a mana buff similar to this amount, and she went from the worst champion in the game to the best? So I think Aatrox might experience something similar, especially since he's the only champion that can effectively use Guardian Angel. He's a great user for that if you get that combination of items, because Guardian Angel doesn't really work on anyone else anymore. But yeah, I'm assuming Aatrox will be strong as hell right now. Sivir slightly buffed, doesn't really change anything. I thought she was already pretty good with Desert synergy, and she just applies a lot of on-hit abilities such as red buff, so this damage change doesn't really change that much about her. Soraka got a range and attack speed nerf, or sorry, range and attack speed buff. The attack speed buff doesn't really change much, but the range does mean that she might live a little longer. Next up, we're at tier 4. Annie Tibbers got nerfed both health and armor. That's good, but I don't really think this changes that much because I always see Tibber living at the end of the fight with quite a decent amount of health, so maybe this doesn't really do anything, but we'll see. I'm glad she got a little affected though. Brand got a minor nerf, of course. This is fully justified. Remember how I mentioned last patch review that buffing Brand was a big mistake? Well, luckily they're adjusting for that. Next, we have Malphite buffs. Great Malphite buffs. I think he needs a little more. Mountain will always be a terrible synergy just because it's so hard to hit when you're not on the mountain map, and it really doesn't do anything to justify playing the champion. So the only way to play Mountain is to make the individual champion strong, and I like that they're doing that here with Malphite. Next we have Yorick. They only changed his level 3 stats, so that doesn't affect anything in the game. Next up we have Taric getting a slight buff, and Singe getting a pretty decent nerf, 25% nerf on Singe. Both changes are pretty good. Taric's not used that much, and Singe is pretty oppressive, so I like this overall. Lastly, we got a Lux buff. I actually like Lux buff since she's the most interesting champion in this set, but she wasn't really being used as often as I thought she would be, so it would be nice to buff her so that people are able to use her more, especially at level 1, to make more interesting team comps and get more interesting combinations that aren't necessarily going to be played in every single game. It makes the game more variant, but it makes every game unique. Next up, we have items. Now, Phantom Dancer. Okay, wow. Phantom Dancer nerf is huge. It no longer dodges critical strikes and now only causes them to become a regular attack. Okay, wow. So that's around like a 20 to 25% nerf in terms of damage. Like before, it reduced a third of damage. Now it reduces slightly less than maybe around 10% of damage. So that's pretty big. I don't think Phantom Dancer is going to be good anymore. Yeah, I think it's probably one of the worst items now. Yeah, that's a little too hard on Phantom Dancer, and you lose a dodge mechanic on top of that, so that doesn't make sense. It needed to be changed, but I don't like this way. I feel like there's probably a more elegant solution, but we'll just skip over that. It's a terrible item. Don't build it anymore. Less class items on Dragon, so that's a good change. Less RNG is good because that RNG felt terrible. Because sometimes you get a class item and then other people get great late game items and then you cry a little bit inside. Okay, they changed the item drops on Dragons and Rift Herald. I didn't even know that was a thing, but apparently now only Thieves Glove, Force of Nature, and Titanic Hydra will not drop from them. And Giant Slayer buff. Okay, so Giant Slayer buff means Rangers might actually be a thing, and I'm excited. And also, it's great on Lucian since he applies on hit effects, so I'm assuming that's really good for him. Yeah, so that's it for this patch. I really like Rangers. Maybe it's enough to make them playable with the Giant Slayer buff and the Ranger class buff. I'm not 100% sure, but definitely excited about the UI changes as well. It'll be easier to calculate level up opportunities. Soulbound sounds super awesome. Senna seems OP. Lucian seems very good with Giant Slayer, as I've been mentioning, and Inferno got Amumu, and Inferno got a trait buff, so I'm assuming Amumu is going to be pretty strong. Same with Inferno. It gives them like, I think at 3 Inferno, it's going to be very good because now they have a late game addition in Amumu to transition into now, and it also opens up like Inferno mages with Warden, and you could even put Oceans in there with the mages. So 2 Ocean mages and Brand, and then pick up Amumu and a different Inferno unit, and then 2 Ocean Wardens, and that could be pretty interesting. Lastly, Berserkers should be pretty cool, and the wind buffs is great for Iceborne abusers like me, but Phantom Dancer is now useless, so just keep that in mind. That's it for this week. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to hit that like button. If you disliked it, you could also hit that as well, but also let me know in the comments what you think about the changes, what you think might be played in the next patch, and feel free to share this video with other people who might find this useful, and also hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. I'll see you guys next time.
Hey guys, hope you enjoyed the video. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, and follow me on my socials below.